I sat in the back seat of the black sedan, my thumb tracing the sharp velvet corner of the jewelry box in my pocket, believing that a man's life could be measured by the weight of the gifts he gave. The leather of the seat was cool against my legs, a stark contrast to the humid warmth of the city night outside. The air in the cabin smelled of artificial pine and the faint metallic tang of city smog filtering in through the vents. I was 68 years old. My hands, which had once repaired abdominal aortic aneurysms with the precision of a watchmaker, were now resting calmly on my knees. They were spotted with age, slightly stiff in the joints, but they were still the hands that had signed every check, funded every dream, and built the foundation of the life I was currently living. Tonight was the 10th anniversary, a decade. It felt like a lifetime, and in many ways it was. The driver asked. He was a young man, sharp-eyed, watching me in the rearview mirror with a curiosity that felt a little too intimate. His name, according to the app, was Tariq. "That's right," I said, smiling. I adjusted my silk tie, catching a glimpse of my own reflection in the darkened window. I looked distinguished. I looked happy. I looked like a fool. It's a special occasion. "Nice place," Tariq said. "Expensive." I pulled a few strings, I admitted, a flush of pride warming my chest. "Vanessa loves the soufflé. She's been working late all week at her firm, interior design." I squeezed the velvet box again. Inside was a diamond tennis bracelet. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a statement. It cost more than the first house I had bought in 1980. It was my way of saying thank you to the woman who had made my retirement feel less like an ending and more like a beginning. Tariq paused. The car slowed slightly as we navigated the heavy traffic of the downtown corridor. He frowned, his eyes narrowing in the mirror as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. "Your wife," he said slowly, "is she the blind lady? Tall? Wears those, what do you call them, trench coats?" I blinked, surprised. "Yes, that sounds exactly like Vanessa. How did you know?" Tariq didn't answer immediately. He looked back at the road, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. The easy, chatty atmosphere of the car evaporated, replaced by a sudden, heavy tension. "Small world," he chuckled, but the sound was dry, nervous. "I drove her last night." I froze. My hands stopped tracing the box. I asked, my voice steady but confused. "No, you must be mistaken. Vanessa was in Boston last night. She was at a design conference. She flew back this morning." The driver's smile faded completely. He glanced at me again, and this time there was no curiosity in his eyes. There was only pity. No, sir," he said softly. "I definitely picked her up from the big Colonial on Oak Street. I remember because she was complaining about the heels she was wearing. I dropped her off at the Blue Heron Motel off the interstate." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the roof of the car. The Blue Heron. I knew the place. Not because I had ever stayed there, but because I had driven past it 1,000 times on my way to the hospital. It was a blight on the edge of the industrial district. It was a place with flickering neon signs and hourly rates. It was a place for long-haul truckers, drug deals, and things that needed to be hidden from the light. It was not a place for design conferences. It was not a place for my wife. My heart began to hammer a frantic, erratic rhythm against my ribs. It was a tachycardia I would have diagnosed instantly in a patient. Fear response, adrenaline dump, the body preparing for trauma. I whispered. "Yeah," Tariq said, his voice dropping to a respectful hush. "I'm sure. She met a guy there, waiting in the parking lot. Tall guy, expensive suit, silver hair. I sat there, the diamond bracelet heavy in my pocket, feeling the weight of it drag me down through the leather seat. I realized in that moment that while I was planning our future, selecting diamonds and making reservations, she was rewriting our past." I looked out the window. The city lights blurred into streaks of red and gold. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, the kind of chill you get when you realize you are standing on a trapdoor that has already been unlatched. If you've ever had your reality shattered by a stranger's casual truth, if you've ever looked at the person you love and realized you were looking at a mirage, hit subscribe. You need to see exactly who she was meeting in room 104, because the betrayal wasn't just in the bed sheets, it was in the bank accounts. "Don't go to the restaurant," I said. My voice sounded strange, distant, like it was coming from someone else. Tariq looked at me in the mirror. "Sir?" "Take me to the Blue Heron," I commanded. The surgeon was back. The man who had to make life-or-death decisions in a split second had taken over the controls. Tariq hesitated, his eyes darting to the GPS. "Sir, that's the wrong direction." "I know where it is," I snapped. He nodded, turning the wheel. We peeled away from the glittering avenue that led to Le Jardin. We turned away from the soufflé and the champagne. We headed west, toward the shadows. The drive took 20 minutes. It felt like 20 years. I spent the time dissecting my life. I looked for the symptoms I had missed. The late nights working, the new passwords on her phone, the way she had stopped asking about my day. I had attributed it to her success, to her busy schedule. I had been an idiot. I had been a wallet with a pulse. We pulled off the highway and onto the cracked asphalt of the service road. The Blue Heron Motel loomed ahead, a U-shaped structure of peeling paint in despair. The neon sign buzzed, the N.O. in vacancy flickering aggressively. "Park in the back," I told Tariq. He did as I asked. We rolled into the shadows near the dumpster. The smell of rotting garbage and stale beer seeped into the car. I scanned the lot. My eyes, trained to find the smallest anomaly in an angiogram, found it instantly. Vanessa's white Mercedes was parked in front of room 12. And parked right next to it, gleaming under the yellow sodium light, was a silver Porsche 911. I recognized the car. I knew the license plate. Asset 1. It belonged to Julian. My breath hitched in my throat. Julian was my financial advisor. He was the man who managed my retirement fund. He wasn't just sleeping with my wife. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a heist. The betrayal twisted in my gut like a knife. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to storm the door and scream. But I didn't move. I am a vascular surgeon. I know that you don't cut until you know exactly where the bleed is. If you cut blindly, the patient dies. Tariq whispered. "No," I said, "not yet." We sat in the dark car. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, the door to room 12 opened. Vanessa stepped out. She wasn't wearing the business suit she had left the house in this morning. She was wearing a short red dress I had never seen before. Her hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was disheveled. She was laughing. She reached into her purse and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. She lit one, inhaling deeply. She had told me she quit smoking 5 years ago. She had told me the smell made her sick. Julian followed her out. He was buttoning his shirt. He looked smug. He looked like a man who had just gotten away with murder. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close, possessing what was mine. I watched them. I forced myself to watch. I etched the image into my retina. Julian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He handed it to Vanessa. She took it, weighing it in her hand, and kissed him, a hungry, Grady kiss. They stood near the open window of the Mercedes. The wind carried their voices toward us. "That's the last of the liquid cash," Julian said. I saw his lips move. I heard the words clearly. "We transferred the deeds on Monday," Vanessa asked. She laughed, blowing smoke into the night air. "He thinks I'm a genius," Julian scoffed. "He signed the authorization forms without reading the fine print. He trusts me." They laughed together. It wasn't an affair. It was an execution. They were stripping the meat from my bones before discarding the carcass. They were looting 40 years of saved lives and missed birthdays. I sank back into the leather seat. A cold, dark rage settled over me. It was heavier than grief. It was absolute. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. I raised it and snapped a photo. The lighting was poor, but the image was identifiable. Vanessa, Julian, the motel room number, the envelope. "What?" I asked Tariq. "I saw it," he said, his voice hard. Vanessa got into her Mercedes. Julian got into his Porsche. They drove away in separate directions, leaving the motel parking lot empty except for the trash and the truth. I looked at Tariq. His eyes met mine in the mirror. He wasn't just a driver anymore. He was a witness. "Take me home," I said. Tariq asked. "Yes," I said. "And I want to hire you for the rest of the week. I need eyes on her when I'm not looking. I need to know everywhere she goes, every bank, every meeting." Tariq nodded slowly. "I can do that. My rate is usually hourly, but for this, I'll pay you double," I said. We drove back to the house in silence. The big colonial on Oak Street looked beautiful in the moonlight. It looked like the American dream. I knew now it was just a facade made of wood and lies. I went inside. The house was empty. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a scotch, single malt, neat. I drank it standing up in the center of the dark living room. 2 hours later, I heard the front door open. "Vanessa," called out. Her voice was cheerful, light. "I'm home." She walked into the living room. She had changed back into her business suit. She had brushed her hair. She had brushed her teeth, trying to scrub away the taste of smoke and betrayal. She smelled of hotel soap. "I missed you," she lied, walking over to kiss me on the cheek. I didn't flinch. I let her kiss me. I smelled the faint residue of the cigarette smoke in her hair. "I missed you too," I said. "Exhausting," she sighed, kicking off her heels. "Just endless meetings." "I have something for you," I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the velvet box. Vanessa's eyes lit up. The greed was instantaneous. It wasn't love. It was appraisal. "Oh, Arthur," she gasped. I opened the box. The diamond sparkled in the dim light. "Happy anniversary, darling," I said. She took the bracelet. She slipped it onto her wrist, admiring the way it caught the light. She smiled at me, a dazzling, beautiful smile that hid a heart made of rot. "It's perfect," she said. "It is," I agreed. She didn't know it yet, but she wasn't wearing jewelry. She was wearing handcuffs made of gold, and I was the one who held the key. Living with a traitor is a specific kind of torture. You have to kiss the mouth that lies to you and smile at the hand that is actively sharpening the knife to put in your back. The week following the discovery at the Blue Heron Motel was a masterclass in suppression. I have performed surgeries that lasted 12 hours, standing over an open chest cavity while a human life hung by a thread. But those hours were nothing compared to the endurance required to sit across the breakfast table from Vanessa and pass her the butter. I played the role she had written for me. I played the doting, oblivious husband. I cooked dinner on Tuesday, a seafood risotto she claimed was her favorite, though she barely touched it. I asked about her work with a feigned interest that tasted like ash in my mouth. "The client is so demanding, Arthur," she sighed, checking her phone under the table. I saw the reflection of the screen in the darkened window behind her. It wasn't a client. It was Julian. "You work too hard, darling," I said, pouring her more wine. "You should think about slowing down." "Maybe," she said, her thumb flying across the screen. She was arrogant in her deception. That is the fatal flaw of the young and the greedy. They mistake silence for stupidity. She left her phone on the marble counter when she went to shower. She left bank statements in the recycling bin, shredded but not cross-cut. She thought I was a senile old bank account, a relic with a pulse, deaf and blind to her machinations. But she forgot who I was. She forgot that I spent 40 years looking for things that were hidden inside the human body. I spent a career finding aneurysms before they ruptured, locating clots before they killed. I know how to find the cancer, and I know that you cannot cut it out until you have defined its edges. Tariq became my shadow. He was no longer just a driver. He was an operative. I paid him in cash, an envelope thicker than his weekly salary handed over every morning. He drove her everywhere, and every hour my phone would buzz with a new location. 10:15 a.m., First National Bank. She's meeting with a loan officer. 12:30 p.m., the Coffee Bean on 4th. Julian is there. They are looking at brochures. 2 p.m., real estate office. She is asking about expedited sales. I sat in my study, the heavy oak door locked, compiling the dossier. I wasn't just relying on Tariq. I called in a favor from an old friend from medical school, Eris, who had left surgery to become a forensic accountant for the state prosecutor's office. Eris came over on Thursday while Vanessa was working late at the motel. We sat in the dim light of my library, surrounded by leather-bound books and the smell of old paper. Eris looked at the laptop screen, his face pale. "Arthur," he said, his voice quiet, "this isn't just skimming." He turned the screen toward me. The spreadsheet was a sea of red. "Julian has been siphoning your portfolio for 6 months," Eris explained, tracing the lines with a pen. "He's moving the assets into shell companies. See this? V. Miller Holdings. That's Vanessa's maiden name. And this one? They're buying a house," I realized, the coldness spreading through my chest. "They aren't just buying a house, Arthur. They are funding an escape. Look at the transfer dates. The bulk of the liquid cash, nearly $3 million, is scheduled to move on Sunday morning. Once it hits the offshore accounts in the Caymans, it's gone. Sunday, the day after my birthday. They plan to leave," I whispered. "You have to stop the transfers," Eris said, urgency in his voice. "Call the bank." "No," I said. "If I freeze them now, they'll know. They'll run. And Julian is slippery. He'll claim it was an investment strategy gone wrong."
"I'm going to let them think they've won," I said. Saturday arrived with a bright, mocking sunshine. It was my 69th birthday. The party was Vanessa's idea, a final public display of affection to mask the getaway. A smokescreen made of balloons and expensive catering. By 6 p.m., my house was filled with friends, former colleagues from the hospital, and the very people Julian had likely swindled along with me. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roast beef. A jazz trio played softly in the corner of the living room. I stood by the fireplace, holding a glass of scotch I hadn't sipped. I wore my best tuxedo. I looked the part of the successful, retired patriarch. Julian was there. He was wearing a suit that was too shiny, his hair gelled back. He walked through my house like he already owned it. He clapped me on the back, his hand heavy and patronizing. 69 years! That's a milestone! You look great, Arthur. Thank you, Julian, I said, smiling back. I feel that's the spirit. Listen, I have some papers for you to sign on Monday. Just some routine maintenance on the portfolio. Monday, I repeated, of course. He winked and walked away, heading straight for the bar. He didn't know that Monday would never come for him. I watched Vanessa. She was wearing a red dress, backless, stunning. She moved through the crowd like a flame, accepting compliments, playing the role of the devoted young wife. She laughed at jokes that weren't funny. She touched my arm whenever someone was looking. I ate the cake. It tasted like sawdust. I waited. At 8 p.m., the music stopped. Vanessa walked to the center of the room, holding a glass of champagne. She tapped it with a spoon. The sharp ting-ting-ting silenced the room. She called out, her voice projecting effortlessly. The guests turned. Smiles were plastered on faces. "To my husband," Vanessa began, her voice trembling with a perfectly manufactured emotion. She looked at me, her eyes shining. "Arthur, you are the rock of this family. You are the most generous, kind, and loving man I know. These last 10 years have been the best of my life." Julian shouted from the back, raising his glass. The crowd cheered. They clapped. They loved the show. I stood up slowly. I leaned heavily on the table, letting my shoulders slump. I wanted to look frail. I wanted to look tired. I wanted them to underestimate me one last time. "Thank you, my love," I said. My voice was soft, forcing the room to lean in to hear me. That was... I walked over to the laptop set up near the projection screen. It was intended for a loop of photos from my medical career, a tribute Vanessa had lovingly curated. "I have a surprise for you, too," I said, my hand hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to share some memories. Vanessa smiled, confused but indulgent. "But I did," I said. I pointed the remote at the projection screen. The lights dimmed.
The first photo clicked onto the screen. It was us in Paris last spring, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. "Ah," the guests murmured collectively. I clicked the next slide. Christmas morning, us in matching pajamas. More cooing from the crowd. Then I clicked the third slide. The room went deadly silent. The air was sucked out of the space. It was the photo from the motel parking lot. It was grainy, blown up on the big screen, but it was unmistakable. The neon sign of the Blue Heron Motel buzzed in the background. Vanessa was standing by the open door of room 12, her red dress disheveled, a cigarette in her hand. Julian was wrapped around her, his hand on her waist, his face buried in her neck. Vanessa dropped her glass. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. Champagne splashed onto the shoes of the chief of surgery. "I didn't take this one," I said calmly. My voice wasn't frail anymore. It was the voice of the surgeon commanding the operating theater. Vanessa froze. Her face drained of color, the red dress suddenly looking like a warning sign against her pale skin. I clicked the next slide. It was a bank transfer record, high definition. The numbers were bold and black. Transfer, $500,000 to V. Miller Holdings. Authorized by Julian Thorne, power of attorney. A gasp rippled through the crowd. I heard whispers starting, a low buzz of shock and scandal. I clicked the final slide. It was a screenshot of a text message conversation. I had downloaded it from Vanessa's cloud account while she slept 2 nights ago. Vanessa, "He's clueless. He thinks I'm at the office." Julian, "1 more week, baby, then we dump him. Cabo is waiting." Julian turned pale. He looked like a man who had just swallowed glass. He looked toward the front door, his eyes darting like a trapped rat. He took a step, intending to run. But Tariq was there. My loyal driver stood by the main entrance, his arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't wearing his chauffeur's cap. He was wearing a dark suit, and he looked like a wall of granite. He shook his head slowly at Julian. "You said you hoped I get what I deserve," I said, turning to look Vanessa in the eye. She was trembling. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The arrogance was gone. The confidence was gone. All that was left was the fear of a parasite exposed to the light. "I think I deserve the truth," I continued, my voice steady. I gestured to the hallway leading from the kitchen. 2 uniformed officers stepped into the light. Behind them was a detective in a cheap suit, holding a thick file folder, the dossier Aris and I had compiled. I had called them an hour ago. I had handed over the forensic accounting report, the text messages, and the photos. embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy. Vanessa, Vanessa whispered. It was a plea. Julian Thorne, the detective said, walking straight to the financial advisor. Julian tried to run. It was a pathetic attempt. He lunged toward the patio doors, but he tripped over his own arrogance, or perhaps just his expensive shoes. He hit the floor hard. The officers were on him in seconds, pulling his arms behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the most satisfying sound I had heard in 10 years. Vanessa stood frozen. She looked at Julian, pinned to the floor, then at me. Her eyes filled with tears. "Arthur, please," she begged, taking a step toward me. "It was a mistake. He made me do it." She was crying now, mascara running down her face. But she wasn't crying for me. She wasn't crying for the marriage she had destroyed. She was crying for herself. She was crying because the ATM had just locked her out. "It wasn't a mistake, Vanessa," I said. The detective moved toward her. She screamed as the officer grabbed her wrists. "Arthur, help me! Tell them!" The officers dragged them out. Julian was shouting about lawyers. Vanessa was wailing, a raw, ugly sound that stripped away the last veneer of her sophistication. The party guests stared in shock. Some were recording with their phones. Others were looking at their shoes. The illusion of my perfect life was destroyed, shattered into a million pieces on the living room floor, along with the champagne glass. But the cancer had been cut out. The bleed had been stopped. I walked over to the bar. The bartender, a young kid who looked terrified, stared at me. "Leave the bottle," I said. He nodded and backed away. I poured myself a scotch, single malt, neat. I held the glass up to the light. It was amber and clean. I looked across the room at Tariq. He was still standing by the door, watching the police cars flash red and blue through the window. He caught my eye. I raised the glass in a silent toast. Tariq nodded, a small, grim smile on his face. The guests began to filter out, murmuring apologies, fleeing the scene of the disaster. I didn't stop them. I didn't say goodbye. 10 minutes later, the house was empty. The music was gone. The laughter was gone. The lies were gone. I stood alone in the center of the room. I took a sip of the scotch. It burned, but it was a good burn. It was the burn of cauterization. The house was silent, and for the first time in 10 years, it was mine.